Hello, Stonites. Welcome back to LFI Educates. Well, in your previous chapter, you have learned that psychology is the study of human behavior. So, by now, you must be so curious to know how psychologists study the different phenomena or the different life activities in our day-to-day life. And as we all know that we human behavior are numerous and uncountable, and that all of this behavior we cannot be studied by just single method, and as a result of which today in this chapter we will be studying about the methods of inquiry in psychology. The topics which we are going to discuss today are calls of psychological inquiry, steps in conducting scientific research, nature of psychological data, some important methods in psychology, limitations of psychological inquiry, and the last one will be ethical issues. Let us study about the calls of psychological inquiry. So when we talk about the psychological inquiry, it is all about the act of asking or finding or probing more information towards the study of a particular behavior. So like any scientific research, psychological inquiry has the following calls like description, prediction, explanation, control, and application. So description means here the researcher will make an attempt to describe the behavior of a particular situation accurately as possible. So here the researcher might be like he or she might attempt to study or observe the study habits of the students. The area where he want to focus may be the attendance, the timely submission of assignments, or time management, and so on. So the researcher, after emphasizing on all this area, it will help the researcher to distinguish a particular behavior from other behavior of a person. Then comes protection. Here, the researcher, after knowing the behavior, it will help him to know the relationship of the behavior with other types of behavior. For example, it will help the researcher to predict a condition or a situation. For example, a person who studies so hard is predicted to get good marks. And the third one is explanation. It will help the researcher to know the factors, the causal factors, the cause and effect will be identified in this explanation. So here it is all about what are the main causes that makes the behavior to occur in an individual, or it is all about identifying a condition that lead to the particular behavior. So for example, the psychologists or the researchers are interested to know the causal factor of a behavior. In other words, the researchers are interested in knowing the factors that makes the person change, or like that makes the student to do well in his or her studies. Then the fourth one is control. After knowing the causes of the behavior, the researcher will now be able to control the behavior by making changes in its condition by applying three important things, either to make it happen again, or to reduce it, or to enhance the particular behavior in a student. Then the last one is the application. Then application is the final call in scientific inquiry. It brings positive changes in the lives of the people. So normally all the researcher they do study or they do psychological inquiry in order to bring changes or to bring solution to a given problem in various settings in which the quality of the life will change. So this is all about the calls of psychological inquiry. Steps in conducting scientific research. Here in the scientific methods, there are different types of attempts made to study a particular event. The first one is objective and the other one is systematic and testable manner. So objective means in scientific research, it refers to the fact of arriving to a same conclusion, which means like back up with data or findings to support the answer. Then the other one is systematic and testable manner, which means it involves certain steps and procedure to follow while doing our research. And these steps and procedures are like conceptualizing a problem, collection of a data, drawing conclusion, revising research conclusion. So let me explain one after the other. Conceptualizing a problem means the researcher, before he or she does any research work, always he need to have a theme or a topic to study. Then after finalizing the topic or the area where he wants to study, he needs to narrow down the focus and develop some specific research questions or problem for the study where whatever he wants to explore. Then the second one is all about collection of data. In this collection of data, before collecting any data, the researcher needs to have a design. Then, like which type of participants he's going to involve in his studies, what are the methods he's going to use for data collection, the procedures that he's going to use in collecting the data, the tools that he wants to use in his research. So, depending upon the research, the researcher will now decide who will be his participant. Then third one is drawing conclusion. After collecting the data, the researcher will now analyze it and draw the conclusion according to his findings, and this can be done through graphical presentation like pie chart, bar diagram, and so on. Then the fourth one is revising research conclusion, which means as the researcher has begun the research with a hypothesis or with an assumption, like now, the researcher is going to revise whether his findings is supported or whether his findings will support his hypothesis or not. So if his findings support his hypothesis, then his research is confirmed. If not, the researcher needs to revise his hypothesis as per the findings and get as per the data collection and test again, and therefore draw to a conclusion which may further be verified by the future researchers. So this is all about steps in conducting scientific research. Nature of psychological data. In psychology, there are different types of data or informations collected from the respondents. Some of these types are demographic information, physical information, physiological data, psychological information. Let me explain each of these with the help of a simple example. Demographic information means it includes personal information like name, age, gender, and marital status. Then physical information means it includes information about ecological conditions, mode of economy like socioeconomic status, housing conditions, and transportations. Then comes physiological data. It involves collecting data like height, weight, heart rate, level of fatigue, blood pressure, or any chronic illness, or is the person under medication. All this comes under physiological data. Then comes psychological information. It involves the area of intelligence, personality, interest, values, creativity, and emotions. So above all, these mentioned factors are some of the areas that fulfill the nature of psychological data, which will help the researcher in collecting information from his or her respondents while doing his research. Some important methods in psychology. When we talk about the methods in psychology, it involves observational method, experimental method, correlational research, and survey research. So in this slide, we will be first discussing about the observational method, then the rest of the method we will be discussing in the following slides. So when we talk about the observational method, observation is a very powerful tool of psychological inquiry, and it has two effective methods of describing behavior, that is selection and recording. So psychologists are very interested in observing things. So when they observe something or maybe a situation or a behavior, they just don't give importance to everything that they encounter, but rather they select a particular behavior for observation. So while observing, a researcher will always record the selected behavior using different tools like maybe shorthand, maybe recording the scenario or so on. And after collecting all the information, they are going to analyze their findings. Then comes types of observation. The first one is the naturalistic versus controlled observation. In this naturalistic observation, the researcher will observe the subject or the respondent in their natural environment without any interference. Then control observation means it is a type of observational study where the conditions or the environment are highly controlled by the researcher. Then non-participant versus participant observation. Non-participant observation means here the researcher will observe the subjects or the respondents over a period of time using his knowledge without any active participation with the group. Then participant observation means the researcher will observe the subject or the respondent or observe the particular events or situation by taking part in the group, not as an outsider but as a member of that group. So this comes under the observational method. Let us discuss about the experimental method. In this experimental method, it is considered as something that is generally conducted to establish relationship between cause and the effect. So cause and the effect between two sets or events or variables. So here, when we talk about the variables, it is we talk about the independent variable and the dependent variable. So this independent variable are those event or the situation which can be manipulated by the experimenter to see if it will have a effect on some other event or situation. But on the other hand, dependent variable is the factor that is measured in an experiment by the experimenter. It changes because of the manipulation of the independent variable. So normally in this experimental method there are types of group involved, which is experimental group and control group. So in this experimental group, it is about the subject in study who receive some special treatment in regard to the independent variable. But whereas the control group is considered as the subject in a study who do not receive the special treatment given to the experimental group. So this experimental method can be carried out either in laboratory experiment or can be done even in the field experiment. So overall, this experimental method is used in order to discover the causal relationship, as we discussed earlier, in order to find out the cause and the effect between two sets of variables or maybe events or situations, like by manipulating the situations under totally controlled conditions. Correlation method. Correlation means relationship between two variables. So it is an example of how naturally we correlate one event with the another event. As discussed earlier or as mentioned earlier, correlation simply means or can be defined as a relationship between two different variables. The whole purpose of using correlation in research is to identify or to figure out or to find out which variables are connected with the other variable. And we have positive correlation, negative correlation, and zero correlation. Positive correlation means relationship between two variables in which both variables move in tandem. When one increases, other increases. When one decreases, other also decreases. Then negative correlation means the relationship between two variables in which when one increases, the other decreases. So normally in statistic, a perfect negative correlation represented by the value -1. Now, when we talk about zero correlation, it is also possible that sometimes no correlation may exist between the two variables. So that is the time when we call the zero correlation. So this indicates that no significant relationship is there between two variables, or in other words, two variables are unrelated to each other. So this is known as correlation method. Survey method. Its main concern is to study the opinions, attitudes, and social facts in a research. The survey research use different techniques for collecting information using techniques like personal interviews, questionnaires, telephonic survey, and so on. So many a times this survey research are being done in order to identify and to know the interest of the people's opinion relating to a particular situation, or it can be even done in terms of marketing area, like to identify the taste and the interests of the customer towards particular commodities and products. So when we talk about the survey method, we have different techniques like personal interviews, and like it is an one-to-one interview using structured and unstructured questions. Then questionnaires can be done by the researchers by distributing with a certain list of questions where the respondent will answer it accordingly. Then telephone survey, it can be done with the help of a text message, or it can be done by a phone call, and it helps the researcher in terms of maybe it helps in terms of time factor. Then psychological testing is all about a researcher will use this in order to identify the level of intelligence or the creativity level or their emotional stability and many more. Then the case study is all about a kind of an in-depth study where the researcher will use it in order to trace the particular information of the respondent. So all this comes under the survey method. Let us now discuss about the analysis of data. In any type of given research, researcher while analyzing a data, they generally use two different types of methodological approaches. The first one is the quantitative and the second one is the qualitative methods. So in quantitative method, the researcher can convert his or her data or findings in terms of scores. The researchers can convert the findings, in other words, like in terms of numbers, or can be graphically represent his findings in terms of scores or numbers. But on the other hand, in qualitative method, data cannot be converted into scores or cannot be represented in terms of numbers or in a statistical manner, but it is more of descriptive in nature. Limitations of psychological inquiry. So in this limitation of psychological inquiry, we have lack of true zero point, relative nature of psychological tools, subjective interpretation of qualitative data. So when we talk about this lack of true zero point, psychological measurement do not have a true zero point. So unlike in other normal sciences, in other normal physical sciences, measurement starts with zero. For example, when we want to measure a table, it starts from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it goes on. But this presence of a true zero on a number scale is missing in psychology. So, for example, according to the psychologists, it says like no person in this world has zero intelligence. So all of us have some degree of intelligence. So this is the reason why it says about lack of true zero point. Then comes about relative nature of psychological tools. So psychological tests need to be properly modified and adapted, keeping in view the characteristic of the context in which they are to be used. For example, we cannot just randomly pick any type of psychological test and apply to any people or to any respondent, but we need to see whether such any type of test, or like whenever we try to do any test on any particular subject or environment or to the respondent, we need to see whether it is applicable or relevant to that certain context or to the certain group of people or not. Then comes subjective interpretation of qualitative data. Here, in qualitative studies, it always says that it is always good to have more than one investigator to arrive to a final agreement or to come to a certain conclusion. So it simply means like we need more than one researcher to come to a certain final discussion of a particular topic, so that we can avoid or overcome biasness towards one individual's point of view towards a particular topic. Ethical issues. This is the last topic for today, and under this, we will be studying voluntary participation, informed consent, debriefing, sharing the results of the study, and confidentiality of data source. So when we discuss about voluntary participation, it simply means the person with whom the researcher wants to conduct the study. So in other words, it means the participant have every right to decide or the freedom to decide whether they want to participate in the study or not. So everything has to be done voluntarily. Then informed consent. It is essential that participants in a study should understand what will happen to them during the course of study. So it is the responsibility of the researcher to update them with all the necessary information before collecting any data from them. Then, debriefing. Once the study is over, the participants are provided with necessary information to complete their understanding of research. So, the researcher should ensure that participants leave the study in the same physical and mental state as when they entered. Then, sharing the results of the study. In psychological research, after collecting information from the participants, the researcher analyzed the data and drew to a certain conclusion. So it is the responsibility and the duty of the researcher to update all the result of the study to the respondent. Then the last one is confidentiality of data source. The participants in a study have the right to privacy, which means the researcher must safeguard all the privacy of the respondent by keeping all the information provided by them in strict confidence. The information provided by the respondent should be used only for research purpose alone, but not for any other personal benefit. So with this, we come to the end of our explanation for Chapter 2.